At my father's funeral, my stepbrother smirked. Dad left everything to me. You. Nothing. My mother cried, begging him to share. He laughed. Go beg on the streets. I stayed silent, watching. When the lawyer handed me a sealed letter, my stepbrother's face turned white. Inside was a secret my father had been hiding for 30 years. When I read it aloud, my stepbrother collapsed. This happened in Long Island, New York. I grew up there, lived in the same house until I was 25. My dad was a hard man, quiet, strict, never showed emotion. He didn't hug, didn't say, "I'm proud of you." But he was always there. Provided for us. Paid every bill. Put food on the table. Didn't believe in feelings. Just actions. My mom, Janice, was the warm one. She tried to keep the house calm, but it was never easy, especially after Ray came into our lives. Ray was my stepbrother. He came into the picture when I was around 10. My dad married Ray's mom after a messy divorce. A year later, Ray's mom took off to Europe and left him behind. My dad never talked about it. He just said, "Ray's staying." And he stayed. For 20 years. He had a charm about him. Always knew what to say. Teachers loved him. Girls loved him. He was the guy who would smile in your face and steal your lunch money when you weren't looking. I was quieter. I didn't play sports. I read a lot, stayed home. I knew Ray didn't like me. He'd call me, charity case, when no one was listening. Told people at school I was adopted. Made fun of my clothes. But I didn't fight back. I just kept going. When I was 18, I moved out. Got a small place with roommates. Worked odd jobs. Paid for night classes. Ray stayed in the big house. Got a car. Got a job at my dad's company. Got everything handed to him. I visited occasionally. My mom would ask me to come for dinner. My dad barely looked at me. Just nodded when I walked in, nodded when I left. Ray? He made sure to flash his watch, his new phone, his business trips to Florida. Still, I didn't say anything. Lung cancer. Stage 4. He didn't tell anyone until it was bad. He called me one day, asked me to come to the hospital. Just me. When I got there, he looked tired. Smaller than I remembered. His voice was rough. He didn't say much. Just handed me a sealed envelope. Don't open it until after the will's read. No matter what happens. Understand? I nodded. That was the last time I saw him alive. Small church. Overcast day. Windy. People showed up in black coats. The kind of silence that presses down on your chest. My mom sat beside me in the front pew. She was holding herself together with tissues and prayer. Ray showed up late. Wearing sunglasses. Grinning. He walked past the casket like it was nothing. Sat behind us. Legs crossed. Didn't say a word during the service. Kept looking around like he was waiting for someone to praise him for being there. After the service, by the gravesite, my mom tried to talk to him. Ray, please, about the house, the company. I know your father wanted. He laughed. Laughed. You think I'm giving you anything? I earned this. He left everything to me. You can go beg on the street. My mom covered her face. Started crying right there beside the fresh dirt. Ray turned to me, sunglasses still on, and said it again. He left everything to me. You got nothing. I didn't respond. Just looked at him. And waited. 3 days later, we met with the lawyer. Office in Garden City. Old building. Smelled like leather and paper. Mr. Bernstein was the family lawyer. Been with my dad for over 30 years. He started reading the will. I, Robert M., being of sound mind, leave the following. To my son Raymond I leave the house, my business shares, and all remaining financial assets. Ray leaned back in his chair, smirking like he just won the lottery. My mom gripped the edge of her chair. There must be more. Bernstein looked at me. Your father also left this for you. He slid the sealed envelope across the table. Ray's face twitched. What the hell is that? I opened the envelope slowly. Inside was a handwritten letter. And a small key. My hands were shaking. But I read it aloud. Word for word. Randy, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I wasn't a good father to you. I know that. But I need you to know something. Ray is not my biological son. He is not related to me by blood. His mother lied to the courts. Lied to me. Left him with me when she fled the country. I raised him because no one else would. But he is not my heir. Ray shot out of his chair. That's bullsh*t. I kept reading. I made a separate legal will. It's hidden from the public file. I left the original as a decoy, so Ray would reveal his true colors. If he's mocking your mother now, I knew I was right. Everything is yours, Randy. The house, the company, the accounts. The key inside this envelope is to a storage unit in Queens, Unit 31B. Everything you need is there. Bernstein opened the second envelope taped to the letter. Read it silently. Then he looked up. This is a legitimate, notarized will. Filed separately. Dated after the original. Signed and witnessed. Ray's mouth fell open. He started yelling. No! That's fake. That's not real. He told me I was getting everything. Bernstein calmly added. This new will supersedes the previous one. By law, Randy is the sole beneficiary. Ray collapsed into his chair. Dead silent. I sat back. Still quiet. So yeah, everything flipped that day. Ray stormed out of the lawyer's office like a child throwing a tantrum. My mom sat frozen. Mr. Bernstein just sighed, rubbed his forehead, and told me. Randy, your father was many things, but he wasn't stupid. But the letter, what really stuck with me, was the key. Storage Unit 31B. So the next day I went. It was in Queens, near Sunnyside, tucked behind an old row of buildings. The kind of place where the paint peels and the clerk barely looks up from his crossword puzzle. I unlocked Unit 31B. The door groaned as I pulled it up. Inside? Boxes. Dozens. Labeled with dates. Old files. VHS tapes. A metal filing cabinet. One thick black suitcase. It smelled like dust and secrets. On top of the pile was another envelope. My name was written on it in my dad's handwriting. I opened it. Start with the tapes. Then the file marked red. I couldn't trust anyone else with this. I took them home and borrowed a VHS player from my neighbor. Yeah, I still live in a modest apartment, nothing fancy but mine. The first tape was dated 1997. It showed my dad sitting at a desk, talking to the camera. His face was younger, but serious. This is for Randy. If you're watching this, it means Ray has shown his true face. He lied. Over and over. I kept everything. The stolen checks. The bank withdrawals. The way he accessed company funds without approval. My hands started sweating. But that's not even the worst part. He paused. Ray set up your mother once. Had her sign a document he claimed was insurance paperwork. It was actually a release form giving him power of attorney over her finances. I paused the tape. My heart was pounding. I opened it. Inside, copies of the release form. Bank records. A full log of every time Ray had borrowed, from our dad's business. A report from a private investigator. And a printed photo. Ray. In a dark parking lot. Handing a thick envelope to a man I recognized. My dad's former accountant. There was even a timestamp. Ray had been funneling money. For years. Moving small amounts, hiding it under consulting fees. He almost got caught in 2012. My dad confronted him, apparently, and Ray threatened to call child services on my mom, said she was mentally unfit. It was blackmail. My dad didn't press charges. But he started collecting proof. That storage unit? It was a vault of betrayal. And now it was all in my hands. A few days after I found the tapes, I started getting calls. From blocked numbers. The first few I ignored. Then one came while I was at work. I stepped outside to answer it. A man's voice. Calm. Cold. You should drop it. I froze. You're Randy, right? The good son? The one who got everything? That's cute. Then he hung up. I stared at my phone like it had just grown teeth. The next day, I found my car's windshield smashed. Nothing was stolen. Just a clean hit. Like a warning. The following night, someone knocked on my door at 2 a.m. I looked through the peephole, no one there. But taped to my door? A photo. Me, standing outside the storage unit. Someone was watching. I went straight to the police. Filed a report. Showed them the documents. The photos. They didn't say much, but the officer wrote everything down and said someone would look into it. I knew what was happening. Ray wasn't working alone. I met Mr. Bernstein again. Told him everything. Showed him the photo. The documents. He didn't look surprised. Your father suspected Ray was connected to some very bad people. That's why he kept it hidden. That's why he waited. I leaned forward. Waited for what? Bernstein slid another envelope across the desk. This came to me the day after your dad died. Timed delivery. Said I wasn't allowed to open it until you found the red file. I opened it. Another letter. Randy, if they start coming for you, go to the box in the floor safe. You'll know what to do. Floor safe? My dad's old house. Now mine. I hadn't even been inside since the funeral. So I went. It was strange. Walking through it alone. The rooms felt cold. Like memories had been pulled out of the walls. I found the study. It was the only room my dad ever kept locked. The key was still on his old keychain. Inside, it was just shelves, books, and a big desk. Then I noticed the floor panel under the rug was slightly raised. I pulled it up. A metal safe. Used the same code he had on his tool shed. His favorite numbers, 9-5-8-2. It clicked open. Inside? A second black file. Labeled simply. Damage. A burner phone. And a handgun. That's where I'll leave this for now. Because what was in the damage file? That wasn't revenge. That was war. And Ray? He had no idea what was coming. So, I opened the file labeled damage. Inside were more documents. All printed. All neatly arranged. My dad's handwriting was in the margins. Notes. Dates. Names. Arrows pointing to connections I didn't understand, yet. I spread it all out on the desk and started reading. That's when I saw something that made me stop cold. A birth certificate. Not Ray's. Mine. I picked it up with shaky hands. It had my name. My birth date. My mother's name. But where my father's name should have been, it wasn't my dad. It was. Name redacted, see attached. The next page had a stamp across it, confidential. I found the attached page. It was another letter. This one looked old. Like it had been folded and unfolded 100 times. The ink was faded. It was a confession. Randy, I always told you I was your father. But I wasn't. I raised you. I loved you. But I didn't create you. Your mother asked me to step in after your real father abandoned her. She begged me not to tell you. I agreed. My knees buckled. I sat down hard. Your real father isn't who you think. His name is Henry Trask. I stared at the name. It meant nothing to me. Until I turned the next page. A newspaper clipping, yellowed and brittle. Long Island man sentenced in $4.6 million fraud case. Henry Trask convicted of racketeering, bank fraud. I kept reading. He was a known scam artist. Faked investments. Ponzi schemes. Ran from the law for years. The article was dated 1989, the year I was born. This is where it started getting twisted. The next file was labeled Intersections. It was a timeline. 1989, Henry Trask arrested. 1990, my mom marries my dad. 1991, Ray's mom divorces and leaves the country. 1992 to 2010. Ray begins showing behavioral issues. 2012, my dad hires a private investigator. Then, 2017. Ray contacts Henry Trask. What? The hell? My stomach turned. I flipped the page. Photos. Grainy. Zoomed in. Ray. Sitting at a diner in Manhattan. Across from him, a man with the same eyes as me. Gray hair. Bent nose. Same hands. The timestamp? 6 months before my dad died. There was a transcript. Ray had found my real father. Met with him. Talked for hours. And I was never told. The last letter in the file was the most important. Ray found out about Henry. He knows you're not mine. He tried to use it against me, to say you didn't deserve a dime. That you weren't really family. I didn't tell you because I knew he'd twist it. I needed time to protect you. That's why I recorded everything. That's why I made the second will. That's why I left the tapes, the files, the proof. Henry may be your biological father, but he is not your dad. I was. And you deserve to know the truth. Not from them. From me. I sat there. Silent. My mind spinning. Ray knew all this. He met with the man who ran from my mom, who scammed half of Long Island, who was now living under a fake name in Jersey. And he was going to use it all to ruin me. The next night the calls came back. Blocked number. I let it go to voicemail this time. The message was short. We're not done. You've got something that doesn't belong to you. Then static. My windows were shut, my doors locked, but I swear the air felt colder. Ray was behind this. Or worse, Henry was. Maybe both. I didn't want to go alone. But I couldn't stop myself. The address listed in the file was in Elizabeth, New Jersey. A small apartment complex above a convenience store. Looked like it hadn't been touched since the 90s. I waited in my car for 2 hours. Finally, I saw him. Gray-haired. Limp in his step. Holding a cane. Henry Trask. My father. Technically. I walked up behind him. Henry. He turned around slowly. Stared at me for a long time. Said nothing. Then he whispered. So. You're her boy. He didn't say. My boy. Just. Her boy. That told me everything I needed to know. You think you're safe now? You think the money's yours? Your old man tried to bury me. Now look at you. Trying to finish his job. I didn't answer. Ray came to me because he knew blood matters. And he's right. You're not a Mercer. You're a Trask. That means something. You think the house, the company, that inheritance, it's really yours? No. That was built off my name. Off my blood. I didn't flinch. Just stared at him. Don't push this, kid. I buried bigger men than you with less noise. Then he turned and walked back inside. Now I know the truth. Ray found my real father. They teamed up. Tried to cut me out. Tried to scare me into silence. But my dad saw it coming. Left me every piece. Every document. Every word of warning. Ray thinks I'll walk away. Henry thinks he still has power. They don't know me. There's one more file I haven't opened. Labeled only. Use this last. It's sealed with red tape. Underneath it a note. Only if they come for you. I haven't opened it. Yet. But I think I'll have to soon. Let me know if you want that part. It changes everything. A week passed since I confronted Henry Trask, the man who technically fathered me, but never once acted like a father. I hadn't opened the last file yet. The one my dad labeled. Use this last. But things were getting worse. My apartment was broken into. Nothing taken. Just papers tossed around. My laptop flipped over. A photo of me and my mom, shattered glass across the floor. A message was carved into my coffee table. You're a Trask. They weren't trying to hide anymore. Ray and Henry wanted me out. Out of the house. Out of the business. Out of the family. I knew what I had to do. The company, Mercer and Sons, had been in our family for 40 years. My dad built it from the ground up. It wasn't flashy, but it was solid. Logistics, freight management, contracts with half the warehouses on Long Island. Ray still had friends in the boardroom. People who hadn't heard the full story. People he was feeding lies to. I scheduled a special board meeting. I sent out invites with one sentence. The truth will be shared. Everyone needs to be there. And everyone came. The conference room was full, 11 board members, 2 accountants, my mom, Mr. Bernstein, and one unexpected guest. Ray. He walked in wearing his usual smug face. A tailored navy suit. Cufflinks. The kind of smile that says, you won't touch me. He didn't look at me. Just nodded to a few people and sat down. Then, someone else walked in. Henry. He looked older than when I saw him last. But still sharp. Still watching the room like a predator. I stood. Before we begin, I need to share something. Something my father left behind. I placed the red-sealed file in the center of the table. He told me to use this only if they came for me. They did. So here it is. I opened the file. Inside were photos. Not just of Ray and Henry meeting, but bank records, offshore accounts, and a recorded call between Ray and a former Mercer employee. In the call, Ray was discussing how to fake documents to remove me from the business legally. How to convince the board I was unstable. How to manipulate votes using favors and bribes. I played it out loud. His voice echoed in the room. He's not even a real Mercer. He's a bastard from a con man. I'll take everything before he figures it out. Silence. The room froze. Ray jumped from his seat. That's out of context. That recording is edited. You can't prove anything. But the damage was done. The faces around the room changed. They weren't with him anymore. Henry stood, slowly. He did what needed to be done. That business should have been mine years ago. Your father stole it. Mr. Bernstein cut in, calm but firm. That's a lie. Robert bought you out in 1991 when you were under federal investigation. You were given a settlement. You signed away any future rights. Henry's jaw clenched. I was forced, you were guilty. Bernstein snapped. And you ran. Like you always do. Ray looked around the room, seeing it all fall apart. You're all just believing this? Some dusty papers and a dead man's letters? He turned to me. You think this makes you better than me? You're not even his blood. You're a charity case. That's when my mom stood. Her voice cracked but was clear. Stop it, Ray. I loved you like a son. But you've become cruel. Robert raised both of you. But only one of you ever respected him. Ray pointed a finger at her. You lied to everyone. You lied to me. No, she said. I protected you. Just like he did. But he's gone now. And you're still blaming everyone but yourself. Ray looked like he was going to speak, then didn't. He grabbed his briefcase and stormed out. No goodbye. No apology. Just the slam of the conference room door. The board voted. Unanimously, Ray was removed from all business involvement. His access revoked. His ties severed. Henry? He disappeared again. No one's heard from him since. Police were notified about the break-in and the threats. I submitted everything. Opened a formal case. I'm still waiting to hear if charges will be pressed, but at least now. I'm not in hiding. Not the threats. Not even the betrayal. What hurt most was knowing that for years, I believed I didn't matter. That I was second best. That I was just there, watching from the sidelines. Turns out, my dad saw everything. He just waited until the end to show it. That cuts the deepest. Because I never got to tell him that I would have forgiven him. That I did forgive him. Aunt Carla, my dad's older sister, called me the day after the meeting. He loved you, Randy. He just didn't know how to say it. But I knew. He talked about you more than anyone. Mr. Bernstein, too. Your father spent the last few years trying to fix what he broke. This was his way of making it right. It's been a few months now. I've moved into the house, our house. Fixed it up. Cleaned out the study. Planted some new trees out front. My mom visits often. She seems lighter somehow. Ray hasn't contacted us. Last I heard, he was trying to sue for emotional damages. It won't stick. He has nothing left to stand on. As for me, I'm still figuring things out. The truth hurt. It changed everything I thought I knew about myself. But it also set me free. Because in the end, family isn't about blood. It's about who stays when things fall apart. And I stayed. So did my mom. So did the truth.